the cloud. All right. All right. So just a brief introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining AOC PM&R tonight for our last pre-midyear meeting event. So my name is Sarah. I'm one of the outgoing conference committee co-chairs, and tonight we'll be hearing from Patti Foster. Patti, amongst many things, she's a well-known author, speaker, and a traumatic brain injury survivor. We hope that this discussion tonight will help us as aspiring physiatrists remember what may happen outside of the hospital or even the clinic for our patients in order to become well-rounded and holistic physiatrists. So let's go ahead and get started. And of course, if any questions come up while we're talking, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to speak on your mic, just do the raise your hand gesture and we'll get to you in a timely manner. All right, Patti. So
Okay.
I know most certainly did not cover your entire biography. So could you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and what some of your current roles are today?
A wee bit about myself is that I love laying hold of the moment because before the crash, I was in TV and radio all of my life, down south, up north, Michigan, Indiana. I just moved back to Texas from Michigan when the crash happened. I'd been back about a year or so. So people are part of my heartbeat.
Mhm.
But now today, I just do a lot of speaking all over the world about brain injury and that transitional step to get back into real life after the changes have happened, after the crash or whatever the edits have happened in our world. So somehow to give hope after brain injury. So I do a lot of traveling, writing. I still do voiceovers for TV and radio and audiobooks and things like that. I love that. So I'm so thankful that so much of my voice has come back in the years. I've gone through vocal coaches and stuff like that. So help to support it and let it grow back and become mine again.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I was very interested in like the voiceover acting. That's
Mhm.
very unique. I've never met somebody to do that. So that's really neat. And I'm glad you're back to doing it.
Awesome. Thank you.
And so if you are comfortable with sharing to us about how, the events leading up to your injury and what it looked like for you around that time of your life.
Right. Um, when the crash happened, I was going into full time. I thought I would be around Chicago the rest of my life. I never intended to come back to the South that rudely. That was just what I thought. However, that's not what happened. I came back. I had an agent, but things changed and the crash happened. So I had to learn life all over. But uh, leading into that, I was still doing TV and radio and speaking. And so the full-time speaking had really kicked into gear, um, and a lot of planning and studying, things like that. So then when the crash happened, then life stopped, came
Mm.
to an abrupt halt. I was dead on the scene. And so life took on a whole different depth and meaning and shape um,
Mhm.
after that. And I laid hold of each moment, nothing to be taken for granted, to lay into each moment, live it on purpose. There's such an urgency about my life. In fact, Sarah, I'll just say this quickly, but something hit me very strongly is that with the moments that we're having together, with whomever crosses our path during this time, there was one word that really stood out to me for some reason: invest.
Hmm.
From this moment on, I urge you, I encourage you, I challenge you. Just like, match. Where do you match? Some are going to, like Ali's going to be up at the Mayo Clinic, and you're going to be at Baylor, Fort Worth, and Dallas.
Mhm.
So from this moment on, professionally, personally, I urge you, I challenge you, invest in the moments, each other, teamwork, you guys on the conference membership team, your family, your friends, your profs, just strangers. Professionally, when you get out, the people you look up to, the mentors, invest no matter what. Patients, families, caregivers, care partners, invest, invest.
I think that's a great piece of advice and unique. That word is unique too, because we don't really think about investing
Yeah.
in our, even our personal lives, especially as us as medical students. We just solely focus on one thing and just lose track of other things. So I think
Mm.
that's really good advice that we could all utilize a little
Uh,
bit of.
definitely.
All right.
I
So our
completely
next
agree.
question our next question is can you tell us a little bit how you personally dealt with your injury, both medically and spiritually?
All right. Medically, I was blessed to have wonderful people on call. And at the moment, it was on a Tuesday night or a Monday night.
Mhm.
And so, sorry, Tuesday night. And so I was blessed to have wonderful people on call to take care of me through it. The medical team. In fact, to this day, I stay in touch with a lot of them
Mhm.
because when the crash happened, all of that area of Texas, it was East and Northeast Texas, Northwest Louisiana. They knew me from the radio, they knew me from TV.
Mhm.
So I was blessed to have so many relationships and people to be around me to know. So a lot of the staff, they knew me. And so I was very much protected. In fact, among all the eyewitnesses, one of them was one of my dear radio friends. We'd worked together for years, but he
Wow.
had no idea it was me on the highway because I was totally unrecognizable. So in fact, he's a Marine. So he even said, Patty, you were a heap of bones and flesh. He said,
Wow.
I knew that whoever that person would not live more than a minute. There is no way the body can endure that kind of trauma and live through it. Uh,
Mhm.
it was very gross. I won't tell you all the graphics. However, it is important that we do have people to come alongside us
Mhm.
to help us through. And the medical team, they were great to my family, to the friends, to the listeners, to give great direction, but not condescend. But I think one of the key things I'll say right here, and then
Mhm.
we can move to the next point, is please, from this moment on, pay attention to your nonverbals.
Okay.
In other words, I can sum it up in a question. Came to me a year and a half after the crash when I began waking from the coma more. What does your life say when your mouth is not moving?
Mhm.
That's what sticks. And so, as a professional, doctor, whatever the avenue is, then be sure, heed and pay attention to the verbals. Make sure that the verbals match the nonverbals. What you say matches what you don't say. The audio to match the video.
Mhm. I think
Because
that's
that's the key thing. Um,
that is definitely, and especially when, you have families and patients who are going through such difficult challenges or
yes.
halting, like you're saying, halting life changes,
Yes.
you have to have that body language of,
Yes.
support and that you care
Yes.
just
Yes.
as much as you're saying you do those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And
I think.
spiritually, God was my only constant. In that
Mhm.
coma, 6 weeks, I'm a living dead person. I have
Mhm.
no memory of anything. But my connection with God, personal connection with God was that real. So that was my one constant throughout all. I didn't have to relearn him.
Mhm.
Everything else, every single basic function of living, I had to relearn. I wasn't anything like this. I didn't look like this. I couldn't talk. I couldn't move, blink, swallow, chew, nothing.
Mhm.
However, I was blessed with people who went out of their way to invest, to care. They were true people. I mean, sure, they were hard on me. They challenged me, pressed me, but they're nonverbals of caring, and when they were crossing the line or out of line, not taking care of the right thing or cleaning up or the mess that had happened to me or the mess I'd made, then my family would take up for me or my sister-in-law or someone would step in and do what needs to be done.
I'm so glad you have that support and people to believe in you and invest in your care.
Yeah, huge.
But to you having us today, I think it's really important to, all of us as medical students know that religion is super important and to take into
Yes,
account like, cultural beliefs. And as osteopathic physicians, at least at my school, they always ask us, ask your patients, what beliefs do they have? It's very, very important. So
yes,
I'm glad that you mentioned that. And that's something we all need to keep in mind is
yes,
religious preference, because that can be the foundation for, recovery for some people.
sure. Yeah, so huge to so many people.
Yes. And so our next question is, what are the most challenging obstacles you had to overcome that you can think of? Probably
Lots
a
and
lot.
lots. Yes. I mean, it was massively
Oh,
arduous. Uh, it was nothing came back to me because most people would think, "Hey, you were 34,
mhm.
surely." I mean, you were a radio person, you were a TV person. I mean, you knew people, you were out with people in the public, in the community. Nothing came back.
Mhm.
Language didn't come back. Words didn't make sense to me. And people talking so much or so loud, and I was so irritated so often and
Hmm.
agitated or bothered and set aside because those telephone poles had been knocked down in my brain. Those telephone wires had been stretched and twisted and knotted and broken and severed. And so nothing was reconnecting. Those dendrites were not doing their thing. And
Hmm.
so uh, that consistency and those therapists and the doctors and that coming in and taking care of me and my family, what a huge difference that made through it all. Um, but even now, like you were just asking me about some of the obstacles or things, about people, I didn't remember people, and some yet I would. Uh, but I remember I was very quiet and I was very subdued. My whisper when they took the trach out, then of course I was just a whisper, just a slight light tone. But even then, I was very quiet, um, but I was very attentive uh, and watching everything. But balance and everything, I choked often. Um, and so not seeing because I wore the patch for 6 weeks plus in that right eye because that one had come out of the socket completely. And so the chewing, the swallowing, learning ABCs again and how to talk and how to speak. But I can say this one thing that just came to my mind is because speaking of learning to speak again. I remember one of my speech therapists uh, nonverbals hit me very strongly from her of condescension, talking down to.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember sensing that, just like a little kid in first grade.
Yeah.
So I would say again, be sure pay attention to your nonverbals because you may think they're fine, but that individual waking from a coma or becoming conscious again,
Hmm.
uh, often language is their first language, I'm sorry, nonverbals, the nonverbal communication is usually their first language. So
Okay.
pay close, extra sensitive attention to what your life is saying without when your mouth doesn't move, because that's their
Mhm.
first language. They will pick up, they will sense and they will respond or react to it accordingly. So be aware of that and pay attention to that.
That's a great example of the nonverbal advice. And did you have, or I'll start here, I guess I'll ask it this way. So you work with a lot of people who've had a traumatic brain injury. You work with a lot of these individuals and their families. What are some of like the top obstacles you see them go through after, they've done the inpatient rehab or outpatient rehab? What are some things that you've seen that maybe we should know about?
Yeah. Two things. What do I do now? And
Yeah.
who do I call for help? Because whether it's the survivor or the caregiver, but often as a survivor, we're looking for uh, um, understand. Nobody gets it. We
Mhm.
feel, and this will be kind of a sum it up or in a few words, but Sarah, it's very much like we feel like we're all alone and we're the only ones, even though I know we're not the only ones, but as we're in it, we're not aware of that. We're not able to think like that, comprehend like that. But there's a huge, huge, deep hole of purpose, and we feel like we don't have a place in this world anymore.
Mhm.
And there's a huge, it's deeper than an identity, and it's deeper than your profession. There's a deep purpose of identity that goes deeper than most counselors are aware of. But psychotherapy is so incredibly vital and important as that individual comes through it. And plus, for the caregivers, I don't want to leave them out because it's so important to involve them. Because one of their great things is have patience on me, have patience on me or with me, because they feel like us as their survivor can be too hard on them because we get so irritable, so agitated, so easily, and we're
Mhm.
ultra sensitive. But consistency is one of the main things that is so important to maintain and to establish.
I love that. And I love mentioning the caregivers because a lot of times in the hospital or in clinic, sometimes it's the patient and that's the sole focus. And like you're mentioning, it's so important to focus on the caregivers, family, friends too, because they're going through the ringer as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But
I even think too, Sarah, I'll say this quickly, but even for the medical staff, for you guys, the professionals, that how debriefing is important. And I know different hospitals and facilities and networks try to provide that to some extent, but also just individually to kind of acknowledge that, put that somewhere on your grid to have a certain amount of time for debriefing for you, whether it's an individual that you contact or a friend or a counselor or a clergy, I don't know, but someone somewhere sometime they have certain amount of time for you individually as the professional, as the one working the scene or the case or whatever the situation is, to have that moment of debrief for you so you can get that off of you so you don't just pile it up or stuff it down.
that's true. And we need to take care of ourselves to take care of others. So that's a great
Mhm.
point too. And then our next question, kind of going off of that path, is what can you tell us about the long-term effects of brain injury?
Wow. So often it's very much a silent epidemic. I know probably maybe you've heard that in different, I think Winslade, William Winslade, I think he mentioned that as well in one of his books, Confronting Traumatic Brain Injury. What is it? Hope, Devastation, and Help. It's one of my favorites. I so respect Winslade. But how that it's very much like a silent epidemic, even the long term, because the incredible thing is, Sarah and everyone else, that often will not look like anything is wrong. We don't walk like that, or we don't talk like that, or we don't physically look like that.
Mhm.
Mm, that's the thing. In brain injury, often, just like you guys probably remember, Susan, who used to be the Brain Injury Association of America president, CEO, she said, brain injury is often invisible since changes are on the inside, and those are often not visible on the outside. So that's a huge obstacle a lot of us deal with because a lot of it is not necessarily physical, but it's in the cognitive realm, that emotional realm, even. So, again, that's why psychotherapy is important, counseling is important. Um, but also, a huge thing is have mercy on yourself. And as Dr. Adams, who's founder, president of Hope After Brain Injury, said, add grace to your pace. Extend that to the patient, extend that to the caregiver, extend that to the others on your team, extend that to yourself, extend that to your your spouse or to your kids or friends. Extend that. No, it won't be easy. No, it will not always be convenient. However, it is vital. It is an important ingredient of life. So just have a go at that. Because the long term, that's one thing I'm thinking about. In fact, I'm trying to even put a book about that, put together a book about the long term effects, because that is so overlooked. And
Mhm.
it can be so often, swept under the rug or the
Mhm.
whatever you enjoy to ignore because it's not always obvious,
Mhm.
or so much is emotional, mental.
Yeah.
So that psychology plays such a vital role, and that neuropsychology and the whole coping with the changes after a brain injury may not be evident, but something to acknowledge and to have some extent of attempt to deal with or talk about or bring up or mention or write about, journal about that. There's huge medicine in just journaling. Get things out so they're not, as I said, stuffed down.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that because a lot of what we focus on as medical students is the acuity of what's going on and
Yeah.
not necessarily how is this individual going to be affected in 10 years, 20 years. We talk about that, but it's not the emphasis.
Yes.
And it's funny you say like the invisibility. There's the Brain Injury Network of Dallas, and they came one time when I was rotating at Baylor Dallas, and one of the participants was there telling us all about it and how great it is. And he mentioned the invisibility. He said, I walk on the street, you wouldn't know that I have these issues, but I do. So I'm really glad you bring that up because a lot of us don't see that at
Yes.
all. I think
Yes.
that's a great point.
Yeah, and you know, and various different PDs will bring me in, police departments, because so many of the
Hmm.
cops don't know how to deal with the brain injury. They think we're drunk or we're high or on drugs or something's wrong with us. We're impaired because we've done something wrong. That's
Mhm.
not necessarily true. Brain
And
injury.
that's another obstacle you have to go through is
Yes.
just finding that, it's just
Mhm.
that long-term effect.
Yeah, yeah. And to be sure as well, you might even mention this as a doc or worker with the patients, is
Hmm.
that there and the Brain Injury Association of America, they have the Texas division and different people. CNS does, Baylor may as well, but different you might just check your hospital to see if you can get the card because the state of Texas, I think they will give them out because I've been on the advisory council now for since 16, but get a card and put it in your purse, wallet, billfold, whatever, that says you are a brain injury survivor. And that way it can help the law enforcement
Hmm.
working the scene or situation to better understand what you're doing or why you're doing what you are.
That's a good point. I feel like that's a really great idea, and I hope that's in use in many different states.
Yes,
That's
yes.
good.
Because I
I
know Hope
love
After
that.
Brain Injury, we offer those. And Center
Hmm.
for Neuroskills, they do the different ones, and I think Baylor has, and maybe UT Southwestern, I'm not really sure, but I know it's very vital and overlooked by a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So we as medical students, maybe we can ask our hospitals that we're rotating at, figure that out.
Yeah,
All right, and kind of leading, you mentioned psychotherapy. So can you just tell us about the importance, again, you've already mentioned it, but maybe in more detail, not only for the individual, but for their caregivers or care partners as well?
yeah, definitely. And it's really important, Sarah, if you guys, like, as the individual, let's say as the patient, how important that psychotherapy is for if the individual wants to go through that by him or herself alone or with the care partner or the caregiver.
Hmm.
That can be a place as well. And for instance, Dr. Adams, Dr. Dina H. Adams, you guys look her up, send her a text, ask her questions. In fact, I believe her email is Dr. Dina Adams. It's DRDEANA at hopeafterbraininjury.org. Ask her questions because she's one of the few that have done the homework to know about, learn about brain injury, traumatic, acquired, all the different ones, to find out what's best for them, to help them to cope with the changes or the strategies or compensatory strategies. And then for the caregivers to deal with and the care partners to walk through and even the medical staff. But they're, even though cases may be similar, they're unique. And like you guys know, that there are so many differences, but how important it is to be consistent and to address those certain things. But also, like for instance, one of my books that I have on my website, and go be nosy on my website. Nosy is very, very good. But on pattyfoster.com, go to my books. One of them is called Hope for the Journey. And I put it together as a 52-week spiritual journal. So there are things that help me through. And what I do, it's one Devo, read the same Devo every day of the week. And then I get in your Kool-Aid and I ask a challenging question for day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. You have the weekend off. And it's where it becomes real to you, and write it down. Like when you're with your counselor or therapist, write key points because you will forget those. We survivors will forget them. And especially with the brain stimuli, today's world, today's society. I mean,
Oh,
we
yeah.
are inundated. You guys are. I mean, you know what you're going through. So just write it down or I keep post-it notes in business. They are my short-term memory. And so I read everything, but that's a huge obstacle to help as well. Write, remind, and then that consistency. Read often. Do what you can to encourage yourself.
Mhm.
Have mercy on yourself. Add grace to your pace. Invest.
Love that. And, kind of going off of that as well, talking about your experience with your loved ones when you had your injury. You mentioned you had really great support, especially from your work family. But can you just tell us what you remember, what they went through, what challenges they had?
Yeah. One thing I remember when I was in the coma in the acute hospital is that some of the key things that the RNs working my case urged my family, keep it positive. Whatever is in the room, keep it positive.
Hmm.
If you're going to start crying or you're talking about the crash, take it outside. Move it outside of the room. And when you talk with the individual, even though like one of my eyes was huge and had been out, they said talk with her as though she's quote unquote normal, as though everything's fine, as though she can hear you, as though she can see you. Talk with her like that. But also another thing I learned that the textbook doesn't teach is that, Sarah, it's so vital that go to that individual and touch that individual. Sure, you have to be careful, but be sure your nonverbal touch. Go close. Let them hear you. Let them sense you because they will, even in the coma, like they will sense your presence. The
Hmm.
power of presence is vital. So to be sure and do that. I know for my family it was huge because I was talking with my mom today and writing down notes
Hmm.
as she was saying, but how important it is, she said, to have others there to help answer the phone because in emergency, boy, you're going to be inundated with people calling, wanting to know stuff. So have someone there to answer phone calls for you. Uh, keep it positive. She said, and her nurses and the doctors did do a good job to keep things upbeat. She talked about her faith, how God was the only one to help her through this tough time and time together. Uh, she talked about just memories that she had of uh, the nurses and how amazing they were to her to help keep things in that positive direction or celebrating every tiny bit of movement, the slight movement. They said how important that was that the nurse or the doctor pointed that out or acknowledged that. Um, uh, I was going to say, but also move ahead just a little bit. I was released from acute hospital, then to rehab, waking from the coma, then to transitional rehab. Right there is a huge drop because lack of communication on the part of the professionals was a huge drop off that somewhere someone needs to address it because in that mode, in that stage of the game, someone needs the social worker, the caseworker, the case manager, someone needs to have, and sure, a lot of people say, okay, you have to do two communications with that individual for the first 2 years, and then you're dropped off the cliff edge. But somewhere, some kind of communication needs to be put to that individual. Like, okay, let me say for me specifically, I'm out of the box because I was media, I was a personality.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't know about media or TV. Sure, some do, but a lot don't. So we're put in, I don't mean this rudely, but we're put into kind of that Walmart clearance rack. We're not like everybody else. I'm not saying we're above anyone. I'm not saying that. But I am saying it is more of a set apart way. So someone needs to learn how to set into that vocational rehab to build a bridge so that individual who is in that specialized category of life will have someone to meet them on the other side in that specialized category of life from that medical side, from that doctor side, or that neuropsych side, or that PT side, or OT side, or speech, or physical, or seeing, or visual. How important that is um, for that aspect of the long term, where that side of life is about to be stepped into, and to help
Hmm.
them have some kind of a connection to invest in or lean on or touch base with or text or email when they might have a question uh, because they want to reconnect with becoming a radio personality again. But there's so much stimuli in
Right.
speaking. I don't want to take much time. I know we don't have it, but that's another aspect. To again invest in that individual, what is best for that individual, not the whole gamut of people, but that
Hmm.
person. So remember, that's an individual, that's a human, not a number, not a case.
I love that. And just kind of highlighting on the vocational therapies. I think that's so important because work and what people do for a living, that's so much a part of their identity,
Yes.
kind of what you were saying. And so when they lose that, maybe that's a part of why they lose that sense of purpose. And so having that sort of communication years after, because it takes
Yes.
years to recover,
Yes.
is
Yes.
something we could all strive to improve on.
Yes, because if you guys could land in and dive into that, jump off the high diving board into that, whew, you could
Hope
start a
so.
huge thing for the whole world. Yeah, because there's another, I'll say this and be quiet, but Dr. Ponsford, Ginny Ponsford, she's in Australia. Spot on, she is. She was incredible in just investing in Dr. Adams to take that next step, to write that book, to put together everything for the leading, Neidler and everything. But there's so much you could say about that. But how important it is that you like you guys when Allie, when you and Sarah were setting up everything, and I said it. I said teamwork, and I laughed, but I meant that because we need each other. So lay hold of the moment, lean into the moment, and then live the moment on purpose. And you know that moment, and you know that moment. Even now, as I speak, something came to your mind. So lay hold of it. Don't miss it. You may not have time. That's okay. Write yourself a note to remind you later. Put it in your phone to remind you later. Yeah.
Right, write down your goals. You're more likely to complete
There
those.
you go. There you go.
All right, our next question is a fun one. If you had one piece of advice for us aspiring physicians and aspiring physiatrists, what would it be?
Dive into something that you love. For me, I love God's holy manna. When I was in radio, the listeners knew I loved peanut M&Ms. So they would give me God's holy manna, peanut M&Ms. So something that you love, dive into it. If it's walking, if it's diving, literally, or whatever, dive into that. Spend some time in that. Give, set aside time for that.
Perfect.
And laugh at yourself. Mhm. And
That's
laugh,
important.
yeah.
Don't
Have
take
that
yourself
good
too
gut laugh.
seriously.
Yeah.
I love that.
Definitely.
And then one of our last questions we have is what resources do you recommend? I know there's a lot, but for individuals and families who are going through this process currently.
Yes. There's so many. Okay, as I said, it's very good, importante to be nosy. Again, go to my website, pattyfoster.com, PATTIFOSTER.com, and go to my contacts tab, and then you'll see brain injury resources. Those are a lot of tried and true, not just to put up there because you had the book, but they are tried, they are proven, they work and are experienced. Also, hopeafterbraininjury.org. We've got a number of resources for medical staff, for caregivers, for survivors. And so let me just quickly point out a few to you guys. Right off, one of I call my head trauma Bible. I forgot to bring it in with me. I was going to hold it up for you, but it's called Head Injury, the Facts, second edition, written by three doctors from Auckland, New Zealand, Gronwall, Wrightson, that's WRI, and Waddell. And they take it and put it into layman's terms. Incredible. So it takes us before the incident, through it, and then beyond the late term or the long term. I have written all over mine. And now, even 20 years later, I still use that. I write all over it. My pages are falling out. I've tried to glue it back together or put rubber bands around it, but it's one I will not get rid of. It's my head trauma Bible. And then Winslade. I love Winslade. I've talked to him some on the phone. I don't even know if Winslade is alive right now, actually. He was at UTMB Galveston. UTMB Galveston. But Winslade, that book that I mentioned, Confronting Traumatic Brain Injury, I think like Hope, Healing, Devastation. Anyway, it's phenomenal. And he touches a lot of the law aspects, in
Oh,
insurance and different things.
mhm.
So good information there.
No.
Sure, it was put out in 98, but I think some of the best, most beneficial, empowering books were put out around 98 or so. Uh, and I think Brady wrote the forward for Winslade in that particular book, the one I just mentioned,
Mhm.
Confront Traumatic Brain Injury. Also, before I forget, there's one by Guess, Maria Guess, where people as caregivers, it's called uh, one of those, probably right here, and Um, oh yeah, sorry, here it is. The caregivers tell. The caregivers tell. Be sure and pull that one up. The caregivers tell the true story of a woman, her husband, who who fell off the roof and traumatic brain injury by Marie Teresa Gass, Gass. That's great for caregivers. And oh, and one more, I'll say this quickly. So many that I love, I could say.
I bet. Yeah,
Uh,
there's a lot out there.
but man, do you guys know Dr. Fitz? Have you guys met Dr. Fitz up in at Cornell in New
I
York?
mm-mm.
Connect up with. Okay, his name is Dr. Joseph Fentz. He says, "No, Patty, you call me Joe. You call me Joe." I love Joe. We met over in Holland when we were speaking in the Netherlands. I love him. But he put up, get the book if you don't have it. Rights. I don't know if you can see that. Uh,
Hmm.
Rights come to mind.
Rights come
Fentz.
to mind. I'll type it.
Rights come to mind. Joseph Fentz, Fins, just one S. Uh, Truly amazing. Deals with the uh, uh, just the I'm blank on some of my words under pressure, but still, there's so many more I can say, but those are some really valuable jewels, possessions.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good to know. So I typed in the hopeafterbraininjury.org for everybody if y'all want to take a look at it. So everybody can see those resources and those books that Patty mentioned. But especially, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but individuals and their families and their caretakers can feel so alone
Yes.
and that they can't relate to anybody, in that moment. So having those resources, those books,
Yeah.
hopefully is the start of joining a community where they feel a little bit more included and involved and give them some hope.
Uh, and
So
the
y'all check
mild
those.
cognitive state, MCS, that's what I was trying to remember. Because
Gotcha.
many of us are in that moderate, that mild cognitive state, or
Mhm. Perfect. Well, we do have some extra questions that people pre-submitted. So I'll read the first one. We still have time. I think we'll probably hopefully end questions about 7:50 if that works for everybody. We don't want to keep you too long. But what are some of the stigmas that you think is important for physicians to know about the traumatic brain injury community?
some of the stigmas for that. People look down sometime on or assume, and I say beware of assuming because it usually makes us the first three letters of that word. Uh, so beware of how we look down or we assume, like I just said, that a certain people will be a certain way. Like, for instance, when people found out that I had had brain injury, then they automatically thought that I was, and I don't mean this rudely, but this is what they said, retarded. They thought that I was retarded and I would be retarded, and they would treat me as a retarded person. Even now, my family, some of my family members, and this happens in a lot of different families, will then presume that because you had brain injury, you're going to be an early onset of dementia. So they're going to treat you like that, and they're going to try to have a guardianship on you already, and there's no reasoning for that. There's no medical background for that. There is no step of that happening. And then people put on like the whole counseling thing. A lot of people look down at that. Um,
Hmm.
so uh, there's such an importance for people to give themselves time or to acknowledge brain injury, but don't build a house on it. Don't stop there. Don't put the boundary on yourself
Hmm.
that saying you can't do this or you have to have or you won't get better. Because a lot of people thought that I would be bad because I was hurt so badly. So I would not achieve anything above what they thought according to the statistics. So
Hmm.
we be aware of it's fine to acknowledge statistics and important. It has its place.
Hmm.
However, comma, don't build your life on that and hold yourself back. In other words, it's almost like you curse yourself when you only go according to what the book says or the stats allow.
Basically, break those glass ceilings.
Yes,
Just
definitely.
try to
Yeah.
do your
And
best, give it your best, give yourself grace.
yes, yes. And keep people around you who can encourage you and
Perfect.
cheer you on. Write
Absolutely.
notes. Mhm.
So we have one really final, well-written question that I want to read in its entirety. It's beautifully written. So it says, as a future physician, one of our primary goals is to provide patient-centered care that aligns with the individual's values and preferences. So considering your journey as a TBI survivor, what insights can you share about what patients in similar situations would have wanted in terms of their care and support? Question. Secondary, and I'll repeat it later,
Okay.
how can healthcare professionals better understand and how can they better meet the needs of the individual living with TBI, ensuring that their care is fully patient-centered?
Okay.
Great question.
Uh, right off, I can say again that one word, invest. Invest your time, invest your effort, invest your concentration, invest your detail, invest attention uh, to that individual. And if that individual is in a coma, as I was, then spend it with that caregiver. Ask that individual. In other words, try this. Put together an FAQ, facts about, or frequently asked questions. Put together 10 questions that you as the physician, and use this. And to each of those cases, frequently asked questions, you as the physician to ask about that individual to get to that slant of that individual, particularly of that case, for that survivor, that patient, that person. Um, what was the first question? Would you just say that to me one more time, see if I touched it?
Sure. Yes. So, what insights can you share about what patients in similar situations would have wanted in terms of their care and support?
Yes, let me touch base again. It comes back down to those nonverbals. Many of us talk even today, 5 years, 10 years. In fact, I was just talking to a fellow from Derbyshire, England, and he's 5 years out, a biking crash. And we were talking, and again, that uh, I could sum it up in one word, care. Make
Mhm.
sure that your verbals and your nonverbals, whether it's a diagnosis, prognosis, whatever, make sure care is a part of that. Keep that as your umbrella. Keep that as uh, your suit or your covering. Keep that as a filter. That what you do is filtered through the word care, because that's very vital, because your nonverbals will communicate that and your verbals will communicate that, because you're going to say stuff that's going to be incredibly tough that they've got to hear. But make sure that filter of care is a part of that, because we as the individual, as that patient, hunger for that,
Mhm.
because we so feel like we are throwaways. We have, like I just said to you earlier, we feel like we have no place in this world. We have no purpose. We are throwaways. We are trash. We are garbage. And so that CARE, put acrostic together for you, and then live that. Okay, now the second part, I might have touched on it some, but Sarah, would you do that again, please?
Of course. So, how can healthcare professionals better understand and meet the needs of individuals living
Right.
with TBI, ensuring that their care is truly patient-centered?
Yes, yes. And even the FAQ, put together those 10, but also even put together maybe for the caregiver, put maybe 5 together that you can ask, or that would focus on that individual, the highlight, the caregiver, the care partner. Um, there was something else you said that made me think of as a mention that second part of the question one more time, please.
So healthcare professionals better understanding and meeting the needs of the individual and ensuring that their care is patient-centered.
Yes. Yes. And have a goal, stepping out of the box to ask uh, a question that would be a vulnerable question.
Okay.
Um, and you can decide how open or how deep or how shallow you want to be. But somewhere, and I'm not saying those 10 questions or 5 questions or the FAQs wouldn't be vulnerable, but they're more of kind of getting to know you type of stuff.
Mhm.
But somewhere in there, along the journey that you will have with this individual, whether it's 1 hour or 3 months or a year, somewhere in there, approach the vulnerability that invests in your field, in your research, in your integrity to be true to what you do, not only in the field, but true to that individual. And you'll have to decide how truthful or honest or revealing or vulnerable or that you choose to be. Uh,
Mhm.
but share that also. Get a maybe in one hand you count them, but somewhere in there get some some people call them accountability partners, but for you guys, professionals, have a few, maybe it's only one other person that you can be in touch with to help you stay true to your field. So, because you're going to have incredible pressure put on you by your CEO and everyone else telling you you only have 15 minutes or you only have 10 minutes with this individual. And we've got to have this amount of revenue in. And and that's the way you'll be treated. That's just part of it. So somewhere in there, uh, be true to some kind of a balance that you can find uh, that includes not only the professional part, but that integrity of who you are and how far will you push the envelope to stay true to your field, to your faith, to what matters to you.
I love that. I think I've said this a lot, but that was great advice and having an accountability partner and having those around you who are lifting you up to support your goals,
Yes.
which I know a lot of our goals will be to really have truly patient-centered care and
Yes.
that being our main intent. So I think that's perfect.
Yes.
Well, that's all the questions we had written down. Does anybody have any last minute questions or thoughts they wanted to share before we end the meeting?
Or comments or things that stood out to you or words or something that you might be dealing with or going through, maybe from your family, personally, or in the match.
Luckily, or I think all of my match friends were feeling okay. Thankfully. Little bit
Ready
relieved.
to take the next step.
Yeah, better
Okay.
now we have more time to invest in our
Yeah.
families and all of
Yeah,
that.
sure. And as you do this, and I'll be quick, but another thing I could challenge you on to urge you and encourage you is through this journey, along this journey, as you take the next step to match the match and where you're going and what you're going to do, because you have these ideas and thoughts and wonderings. Find your own, search for your own, discover your own motto for living. Some
Hmm.
people say mantra. I call it motto for living. When I began waking from the coma, it was probably about a year after or more. MAD now came to me. Make a difference now.
Hmm.
Patty Foster, you don't know how many moments you have left, nor do you know the quality of those moments, that time. So while you have this time, while you have this moment, that's what I say. Make a difference now. I choose to lay hold of the moment, lean into the moment, live the moment on purpose. So you can find, and I will loan you mine until you find yours. If you want it, you can
I
have it.
was about to say I might need to borrow that for the time
Okay.
being. I'm not creative, but I absolutely love that.
Sweet, sweet. And I would love to hear from you. If you guys want to shoot me a text, or you can put that in the chat or send them or email me, uh, whatever's good to you. Or if you want me just to talk about something or answer something for you or to pray for you, count me in. I will definitely pray for you.
Thank you so much, Patty. Looking at the chat, we don't have anything written down, so I know some students might be on a rotation or something. So just feel free to reach out to us. And if you want Patty's email, I can send it to you guys. She's always been so responsive and kind to me, so she will do the same for all of you as well. She's so generous with her time. So but on behalf of AOC PM&R and all of us here this evening, I wanted to thank you so much for just taking an hour out of your time. You're very busy and to give us great insight onto what individuals and caregivers go through, but also great advice just as future professionals.
Thanks.
So we really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I just pray that you will invest in each moment, individuals, and take nothing for granted, even the strangers whose paths you will cross. Soak it up like a bounty quicker picker upper. And, and so the
Love it.
moment you lay hold of it. So I cheer you on as you take this next step. And just know that I'm in your balcony cheering you on it. I won't fall over it, but toss me a few God's holy manna every now and then. Encourage each other. Yeah. That's always a nice thing to send a text or even snail mail, but those moments matter. So
Yeah.
cheers to you. I am
Thank
on your side.
you. We have lots of thank yous in the chat
Awesome.
saying it was very inspiring. So, all
Sweet.
right. Thank you, everyone. This concludes the meeting.
Thank you
And
so
let
much,
me
Patti.
stop
Awesome. You're
recording.
so welcome. Thanks so much.
Such a pleasure to get to meet you, and thank you for the incredible